North Korea has taken the world by surprise with its major policy shift in unification and its re-characterization of South Korea. Now, the world's most isolated state is reopening its borders to the outside world, diversifying its diplomatic channels. As experts decode Pyongyang's latest diplomatic moves, Washington analyzed that North Korea has no intention to return to denuclearization talks, signaling a possible change in its North Korea policy. Shifting dynamics on the Korean Peninsula. That's the topic of today's Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul, and with me here in the studio are Go Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
And Shreyas Reddy, Correspondent at NK News Seoul. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with you, Shreyas. So the South Korea-U.S. joint drill, dubbed the Freedom Shield exercise, it's been held for the past 10 days and is nearing its end. But unlike previous years, North Korea is yet to carry out missile provocations. What could be some possible reasons?
Well, as with many things related to North Korea, a lot depends on whom you ask about this. So there have been some theories going that perhaps North Korea might be running low on missiles or prioritizing where it's allocating them. And some reasons people have suggested for that include maybe they're selling a lot of them to Russia and so are prioritizing that. Others are saying maybe they're reallocating them closer to the border areas as they continue their fortifications. Or maybe they're just running low. But at the same time, what North Korea has an entirely different take on it, where they came out with a statement saying the reason they're not going to respond to the exercise in the same way this time is because their soldiers have more important things to do with economic construction projects. And obviously, as with many North Korean state media statements, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Because we know that North Korea typically reacts to these exercises with a lot of bluster, and even in that statement, they still criticized the exercises as provocations, framing them as war drills against North Korea, and said that the US and South Korea would pay a dear price for that. And at the same time, I think we should also note that, yes, they haven't launched ballistic missiles like in the past, but it's not like there has been no military response.
Right.
Even if the soldiers are supposedly busy with construction projects, they were clearly able to deploy them for artillery drills, which Kim Jong-un himself oversaw last week. And essentially these long-range artillery drills took place near the border, and they framed it as an exercise that with Seoul in sight, Seoul essentially in range of those artillery drills. And so that was one aspect. And South Korea's military also said that they detected North Korean attempts to jam navigation, US and South Korean navigation systems during the drills, and seemingly there hasn't really been any impact on the drills. They've continued as normal, but it's clear that North Korea is at least acting in some way, even if it's not the way we've come to expect.
Well, some experts also analyze that it's a carefully calculated move, not making any missile provocations, considering the two sessions that were held in China that just wrapped up, and also Russia's upcoming presidential election. Yeah. So Kim Jong-un probably didn't want to interrupt the major political events in China or Russia, the two most important partners of North Korea. And I think that's also one way of looking at it. Dr. Kool, a North Korean delegation led by North Korea's foreign minister, Vice Foreign Minister Bang Myung-ho has recently visited Mongolia, making a rare overseas trip for the first time in several years. And North Korean delegations, they also visited several other countries as well, not only to countries that are traditionally close to North Korea, but also others, including Brazil and Kenya. Could you walk us through some of the main events that we need to know during their visits, and also why do you think Pyongyang is pushing for these rare overseas trips now at this particular time?
Well, North Korea is clearly aiming at expanding its public diplomacy sphere. Clearly, they are visiting Mongolia for mostly to talk about raising the typical level of cooperation in economic domain and political domain. But I would say that overall what North Korea is doing is a manifestation of two things. There's expression of confidence. I think the fact that North Korea has established very close strategic cooperative relationship with Russia has given confidence or empowered North Korea to be more outgoing, more active in the diplomatic sphere. But also, it actually is a reflection of lack of confidence. There's a contradiction there because we have to remember that only last year, it was reported that North Korea was scaling down its diplomatic presence around the world. So North Korea normally operates up to 50 or so like diplomatic sites, including consulates and embassies. But then it was reported that North Korea will be shutting down dozens of them, especially in diplomatic sites located in third world countries in the global south, such as Africa and Latin America. But now that the North Korea is reaching out to precisely in countries that are located in the global south, we see a contradiction there. And I think that one of the motivations could have been the establishment of foreign relations between South Korea and Cuba. I think Cuba has for a long time been a historical ally, a close friend of North Korea. And I think this sudden establishment of diplomatic relations probably has shocked the North Korean regime that, in fact, it's isolated, and then it's isolated because it's been focusing too much in improving and upgrading the relationship they already have with China and Russia. So I think it has reminded North Korea of the historical importance of the non-aligned movement, which are essentially the idea that these are countries that are aligned neither with the United States nor China. I think this is the idea that probably has getting more impetus, and I think that this is the reason why North Korea is reaching out again to countries like Mongolia. And Mongolia is a very important neighbor to North Korea. And I think if North Korea would like to see distancing relationship between their country and Mongolia precisely at this point when Cuba has normalized its diplomatic relations with South Korea.
So South Korea's forming diplomatic ties with Cuba may have played a big part, and it's also a way of North Korea presenting its confidence on the global stage, which we could also sense a bit of insecurity, but that's somewhere along the lines that you read it. Now, Shreyas, Germany has recently made an inspection at its embassy in Pyongyang, although it says no decision has been made yet on whether the embassy will reopen. Meanwhile, the UN has also appointed a UN resident coordinator for North Korea. And pundits point to, like Dr. Go has just pointed out, they point to South Korea's forming of diplomatic ties with Cuba, as well as its new two-state approach, completely separating itself from South Korea as some of the reasons behind Pyongyang's recent active engagement with the West. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there are lots of different aspects to explore here. The first of which, of course, is when we're talking about active engagement, it's all relative, right? If we compare it to the pandemic era, obviously everything has shot up a lot. But in some ways, it's more like a resumption or moving gradually toward the sort of engagement that they had with some of these countries in the past. Germany and even other European countries like Sweden, for example, which has long been a very valuable intermediary between the West and North Korea. These are the kinds of countries with which North Korea has had relatively neutral relations compared to a lot of other Western powers. So, so for them at the moment, if they are going to start letting Western countries back in, I think countries like Germany would be more acceptable. It's something that would work better for them, but it's more like gradually restoring what was already there. And so I think that is a big factor. Obviously, it is still significant. This isn't to say that it's not. I think any engagement given North Korea's current diplomatic approach is going to be very important, and there's certainly been a prolonged silence from them on multiple fronts. So a lot of these countries, they have been waiting a long time to go back in, and now at least there's some signs of hope that it could start happening this year. But at the same time, it's still North Korea is going to be very selective with whom it allows back into the country, and whom it's willing to engage with. Just because they're willing to talk to Germany does not mean, for example, they'd be willing to talk to the US or some other NATO members with which it is more likely to disagree. And also in terms of UN operations, there are some UN operations Pyongyang does consider very valuable to its needs. It's more likely to perhaps, it might be a little more receptive to, let's say, health or UNICEF operations, although at the moment even they're still waiting to hear back. Then it might be some others. Even the new UN resident coordinator, for example, initially he's going to be working out of Bangkok. So it's not something that, at the moment, I think we have a reason to be hopeful, but let's perhaps not expect too much just yet. It'll take time. But also just touching upon something that Dr. Go raised earlier, a lot of North Korea's engagement right now, it's something that they kind of signaled, Kim Jong-un signaled in the end of year party plenum in December, when they kind of said, we're going to prioritize relations with socialist countries and non-aligned countries, and I think, or as they put it, anti-imperialist countries. And in a sense, that isn't so much a fundamental change, it's more a back-to-basics approach. While Kim Jong-un has distanced himself from his grandfather and father's approach to unification and some economic policies, he has, in some ways, this is going back to Kim Il-sung's initial diplomatic strategy, which was very much focused on the global south. And so in some ways, North Korea is now looking to these other smaller partners that they still had relations with them in the past, but perhaps to some extent now it's going to prioritize them a little more, even as it's shutting its embassies in many of these countries, perhaps financial reasons, perhaps for other political reasons. But the visits like the one to Mongolia show that it is looking to diversify its diplomatic engagement, even as in some other ways it is shifting away from perhaps dealing with some of the countries which have a bigger stake in North Korean affairs.
So you've mentioned that we perhaps shouldn't be reading too much into this. It may just be gradually returning to pre-pandemic normalcy, and that North Korea also pointing out that it's just a selective few that North Korea is reopening borders to. But do you think that perhaps this Pyongyang's push to reopen diverse diplomatic channels also has to do with Trump's possible comeback? Because some pundits say that North Korea is trying to present itself as, again, a separate state from South Korea and re-engage in talks with Trump, the US. Again, what do you say to this?
So I think there's definitely no doubt that North Korea will be keeping a close eye on the US election and particularly Trump. But at the same time, it's something that they do anyway. And typically what happens in US election years is, unless there's someone particularly objectionable, they will avoid commenting on the frontrunners, avoid commenting on the candidates until something becomes clear. And so I think but at the same time, North Korea, they definitely know they won't be able to deal with Biden. Biden has made that abundantly clear many times. So perhaps they would definitely be hopeful for a Trump return. At the very least, there might be scope for engagement. Who knows, they might even hope to get something concrete out of it. But for them, it's definitely going to be something that they're not going to put all their eggs in this one basket. They also still have bad memories of the Hanoi summit, right. And they know that Trump is one man. He is willing to go outside the system at times. He's willing to do things at a personal level more than most US presidents, but there's still a system that could oppose them from getting the long-term results. So right now, at the moment, Trump is going to be a big factor. It's something that they're going to be watching. But for them, it's more about the possibility that having Trump, even whether or not they get something out of him if he gets elected, he might be less inclined to work with South Korea and Japan than Biden is, because at the moment, none of those three administrations is on the same page as North Korea, even if the Japanese Prime Minister says he's willing to have a summit. So I think that trilateral alliance is one factor, and Trump's more individualistic personality is something that North Korea will be keeping an eye on. but at the same time, they're going to continue with their wider diplomatic shift on their own terms, while keeping a big gap in that corner to see what happens in the US.
All right, our next question is going to be a bit of a lengthy one, Dr. Go. A U.S. intelligence office has released a report assessing North Korea's nuclear threats. It said that North Korea has no will to return to denuclearization talks and is now seeking acceptance as a nuclear state with the help of Russia. And this while Chief of the U.S. Forces Korea, Paul LaCamera, said that his strategy of deterring North Korea's nuclear threats has shifted from preventing development of nuclear weapons to now to preventing the use of nuclear weapons, which sounds a lot more threatening. Is Washington taking steps to recognize North Korea as a nuclear state?
Well, I wouldn't think so. The reason is that clearly we are talking about, so let's address the second part of your question about General LaCamera, the commander of the USFK here in Korea. And even though he's a four-star general, he actually belongs to the US Army. He's under the control of the Department of Defense. So his duty is to come out with a practical response to actual threats. Whereas what North Korea aspires to do right now, either through the standing shoulder to shoulder with Russia, a nuclear state, and be perceived as a nuclear state by precisely being like being a partner of Russia, which is to acknowledge as a nuclear state, also by the United States eventually. That happens to be a diplomatic move. So that'll be under the purview of the State Department or the U.S. President, for instance. So the U.S. general talking about taking practical steps to prevent North Korea from using nuclear weapons, which is essentially a basic definition of deterrence, is essentially a responsible thing to do, in my view. So it's quite different from, say, like the State Secretary, for instance, Tony Blinken or the President Biden commenting on this issue and say that U.S. policy has shifted on North Korea, has shifted more from denuclearization to deterrence. That'll actually represent a huge step in terms of changing the orientation of U.S. policy towards North Korea. So I think this is the reason why I wouldn't read too much into what General LaCamera said. So what General LaCamera has just said is essentially a recognition of what the practical steps that the alliance is taking right now to prevent North Korea from, or dissuading North Korea from using nuclear weapons, or even if we are even lucky with this, then we eventually dissuade North Korea from even issuing threats of using nuclear weapons. So, and then for that, it requires the use of a huge amount of deterrence measures, and that's exactly what the alliance is doing right now. For instance, by carrying out the annual joint military exercise, Freedom Shield. So, and then addressing the first one here, question about North Korea aspiring to be acknowledged as a nuclear state by standing shoulder to shoulder with Russia, it's all about the perception. I think North Korea wants to play with the perception of the global community and the opinion that by being with Russia in this case, and also talking about nuclear weapons as equals with a nuclear power such as Russia, I think North Korea wants to create the perception that the North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons is actually normal. So essentially trying to normalize itself in the view of the global opinion. And it's a diplomatic move after all. And I think this is the reason why North Korea wants President Vladimir Putin of Russia to reciprocate the visit to Pyongyang, which the Russian president has promised several times, but has yet to be done. So I think if that indeed happens, then North Korea would perceive such a move as a recognition of North Korea as a nuclear state, as well as a recognition of North Korea as a regional power based on the fact that it possesses nuclear weapons.
And just this afternoon, we heard that President Putin has said North Korea has its own nuclear umbrella and it did not ask for any help from Russia. How do you interpret this?
So I think this is a gesture towards North Korea. I think Putin is fully aware of what North Korea wants to get from Russia, which is acknowledgement of North Korea as a nuclear state. But I don't think Russia is ready to give that to North Korea yet. Clearly, that's a huge step forward, even though it's very symbolic. And then also it really undermines Russia's status as a P5 or the permanent members of the Security Council, which is based on the fact that there are only 5 countries in the world that are officially allowed to possess nuclear weapons. So by recognizing North Korea as another nuclear state, will completely undermine the status of Russia as an official nuclear state. So I don't think Russia is really yet, and it's not ready yet to grant that status or recognition to North Korea. But at the same time, Putin depends on North Korea for the progress being made on the Ukraine war front. So for the munition assistance and other types of weapons assistance, Russia needs North Korea's goodwill. So essentially, Putin is throwing a bone towards North Korea, but at the same time, it's remaining ambiguous when it comes to granting North Korea the nuclear state status. So I think it's Putin is doing a good job at playing with ambiguity. That's his time.
All right, we have a lot more grounds to cover tonight, but we are a little pressed on time. So one final question for you, Mr. Reddy. Seoul's foreign ministry plans to scale back a bureau that has been handling North Korea's nuclear issue for the past 2 decades. And also, there's been some changes in Washington as well. The title Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asia given to Jung Pak was renamed as U.S. Senior Official for North Korea. What significance does this hold? What does this imply?
Well, in terms of the title, so this is something that I've spoken to U.S. officials in the past about as well, just asked them, and essentially it's not so much a formal change as much as an acknowledgement that they cannot formally change things right now. This is something that the U.S. has done in the past for special representative level officials, so particularly senior officials who haven't yet gone through the regular approval process. This is something even during the Trump era, the Obama era, this is something that happened. And in the case of Jung Pak, what's happening right now is the previous special representative for North Korea, Ambassador Song Kim, retired, leaving a vacancy, and as the next person in line, she has effectively stepped up. So she was deputy special representative. She cannot yet be formally appointed special representative, so she's instead serving as the senior official. This does speak to a wider situation, perhaps in Washington, where at the moment there appears to be a dearth of North Korea-focused officials because it is a lower priority for them compared to some other issues. But in the context of, especially in an election year, it is not going to be a very high priority for them to appoint more North Korea-focused officials. So for now, she's holding the fort.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there tonight. Thank you so much, both of you, for making time for us. We appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.